The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Petty Officer Second Class Maria Santos pulled on her combat boots for what she thought would be a routine patrol. She had been deployed to the mountainous region for 8 months now, leading a small reconnaissance team through terrain that seemed to swallow soldiers whole. The air was thin at this altitude, and every breath felt like pulling water through a straw. Maria had grown used to it, just as she had grown used to the constant weight of her rifle and the way her teammates looked to her when things got complicated. Her team consisted of 6 people, each one handpicked for their skills and reliability. There was Jackson, the communications specialist who could fix a radio with nothing but wire and determination. Chen handled the medical supplies and had saved more lives than anyone cared to count. Rodriguez was their navigator, a man who could read terrain like others read books. Williams managed their equipment and somehow always had the right tool at the right moment. Thompson was their youngest member, fresh from training but eager to prove himself. And then there was Maria, the one who made the calls that kept them alive. They had received orders the night before to investigate reports of enemy movement in a valley approximately 15 kilometers from their base. Intelligence suggested it was a supply route, nothing more. The briefing had been quick, almost casual. Get in, observe, report back. Standard procedure. Maria had done this dozens of times before, and each time they had returned without incident. She had no reason to believe this mission would be any different. The team moved out at dawn, their footsteps silent on the rocky path. They traveled light, carrying only essential supplies and ammunition. The mountains around them were beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Steep cliffs dropped away into mist-filled valleys, and the peaks above them touched clouds that seemed close enough to grab. Maria loved these mountains despite their dangers. They reminded her why she had joined the Navy in the first place, though most people found it strange that a sailor would spend so much time on land. She had grown up in a small coastal town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Her father had been a fisherman, her mother a teacher. They had wanted her to stay, to settle down with someone local and live a predictable life. But Maria had always felt pulled toward something bigger, something that mattered beyond the boundaries of her hometown. The military had given her that purpose, and she had never looked back. As the sun climbed higher, the team reached a ridge overlooking the valley they were meant to survey. Maria signaled for everyone to take position, and they spread out along the rocky outcrop, each person finding cover behind boulders and scrub brush. She pulled out her binoculars and began scanning the valley floor below. At first, she saw nothing unusual. A narrow dirt road wound through the center, flanked by steep slopes on either side. A few abandoned structures dotted the landscape, remnants of villages that had been evacuated years ago. Rodriguez moved up beside her, his own binoculars pressed to his eyes. He pointed toward the far end of the valley where the road disappeared around a bend. Maria adjusted her focus and saw what had caught his attention. Dust. A thin plume rising into the still morning air. Vehicles were coming, and they would pass directly below their position. She made a quick decision. They would observe and document whatever passed through, then make their way back to base to file their report. Simple and clean. She signaled to Jackson to prepare the communication equipment and to Chen to ready the camera for documentation. Everyone moved with practiced efficiency, years of training evident in every gesture. The vehicles came into view 20 minutes later. 3 trucks, heavily loaded and moving slowly over the rough terrain. Maria counted approximately 15 people visible in and around the vehicles, all armed. She photographed everything, noting weapons, equipment, and direction of travel. This was exactly the kind of intelligence their command needed. The mission was going perfectly. Then Thompson shifted his position slightly, dislodging a small rock that tumbled down the slope. The sound was tiny, barely audible over the wind, but in that moment it might as well have been a gunshot. One of the people below looked up, then another. Maria saw the exact instant they were spotted, saw the way weapons swung toward their position, saw mouths opening to shout warnings. Everything that happened next occurred in the space of heartbeats. Maria screamed for her team to fall back, to get off the ridge and into cover. Gunfire erupted from below, bullets striking rock and sending fragments flying. The team scattered, each person running for the designated fallback position they had identified when they first arrived. This was protocol, drilled into them until it became instinct. If compromised, retreat to secondary position and regroup. Maria ran, her legs pumping as she leaped over rocks and dodged around obstacles. Behind her, she could hear her team doing the same, their breathing harsh and rapid. Bullets continued to crack through the air, some coming terrifyingly close. She reached a cluster of large boulders and threw herself behind them, immediately turning to counter people as they arrived. Jackson came first, sliding into cover with his radio still strapped to his back. Chen followed seconds later, her medical bag bouncing against her hip. Rodriguez appeared next, his face set in grim determination. Williams dove behind the rocks, rolled, and came up in a crouch with his weapon ready. Thompson stumbled as he ran but caught himself and made it to safety. 6 people. Everyone had made it. Maria felt a surge of relief even as her mind raced through their options. They needed to move to put distance between themselves and the enemy before they were surrounded. She was about to give the order when the first explosion shook the ground beneath them. Someone below had a grenade launcher, and they were using it to flush the team out of cover. The blast was deafening, showering them with dirt and debris. Maria's ears rang, and for a moment she couldn't hear anything except a high-pitched whine. She shook her head, trying to clear it, and looked at her team. Everyone was moving, checking weapons, and preparing to run again. They were professionals, and they would get through this. She pointed toward a narrow ravine that would provide cover and lead them away from the valley. It was their best chance. Her team nodded, understanding, and they prepared to move on her signal. Maria counted down with her fingers, 3, 2, 1. They moved as one unit, breaking from cover and sprinting toward the ravine entrance. Maria led the way, her boots finding purchase on loose stones as she ran. Behind her, she could hear her team following, their footsteps mixing with the continued crack of gunfire. The enemy was pursuing now, and that changed everything. What had been an observation mission had become a fight for survival. The ravine walls rose up on either side as they plunged into the narrow passage. It was darker here, shadowed from the sun, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Maria's breath came in short gasps, the thin air making every movement harder than it should be. She pushed forward, knowing that stopping meant death for all of them. They ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The ravine twisted and turned, sometimes narrowing so much they had to move single file. Other times opening into small clearings littered with rocks and stunted vegetation. Maria chose their path by instinct, always moving upward and away from the valley floor where their pursuers would have the advantage of numbers. Finally, she spotted what she was looking for, a split in the ravine wall, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through but leading upward toward higher ground. She signaled for the team to follow and pushed herself through the gap. Rocks scraped against her uniform and equipment, but she forced herself forward until she emerged on the other side. The team gathered in a small depression surrounded by boulders. Everyone was breathing hard, faces flushed from exertion and adrenaline. Maria did a quick check, looking each person over for injuries. Everyone seemed intact, though Thompson had a cut on his cheek from flying rock fragments. Chen was already moving to clean it, her hands steady despite everything they had just been through. Jackson worked on the radio, trying to raise their base and report their situation. His face grew increasingly frustrated as he adjusted frequencies and checked connections. After several minutes, he looked up at Maria and shook his head. The radio was dead, damaged either by the blast or the rough escape through the ravine. They were cut off from command, alone in hostile territory with an unknown number of enemies searching for them. Maria felt the weight of command settle more heavily on her shoulders. Every decision from this point forward would determine whether her team lived or died. She gathered them close and spoke in a low voice, laying out their situation with brutal honesty. They were 15 kilometers from base, possibly more now after their evasive running. They had limited ammunition and supplies. The enemy knew roughly where they were and would be searching for them. Their only advantage was knowledge of the terrain and their training. Rodriguez pulled out his map and compass, studying their position. He traced possible routes back to base, weighing each one against the likelihood of enemy patrols. The most direct route would take them back through the valley they had just escaped, which was obviously suicide. The longer routes meant several days of travel through mountains with limited water and food. Neither option was good, but they had to choose. Maria made the call. They would take the mountain route, traveling at night and hiding during the day. It would be slower and more difficult, but it gave them the best chance of avoiding enemy contact. Her team accepted the decision without argument, already beginning to prepare for the journey ahead. They redistributed supplies, ensuring everyone carried roughly equal weight. Ammunition was counted and allocated carefully. Water was the biggest concern, as they had only expected to be out for a single day. As evening approached, they ate sparingly from their rations and tried to rest. Maria took first watch, positioning herself where she could see the approaches to their hiding spot. The mountains grew cold as the sun set, and she pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. Stars began to appear overhead, so many and so bright that they almost seemed unreal. In another life, she might have found them beautiful. Now they were just markers for navigation. She thought about her family, wondering what they were doing at that moment. Her mother would be preparing dinner, probably worrying about Maria even though she had no idea her daughter was in danger. Her father would be working on his boat, making repairs that seemed endless but kept him occupied. Her younger sister would be studying for exams, determined to become a doctor, despite the long years of education ahead. They all seemed very far away, part of a world that felt increasingly disconnected from the reality Maria now inhabited. When full darkness fell, they began to move. Rodriguez led navigation, using the stars and his compass to keep them on course. Maria stayed in the middle of the formation, able to see and direct everyone. They moved slowly, testing each step before committing their full weight. The terrain was treacherous in the dark, full of loose stones and hidden drops. One wrong step could mean a broken ankle or worse, and they could not afford injuries. Hours passed in tense silence. They covered perhaps 5 kilometers, a frustratingly small distance for the effort expended. But Maria knew better than to push for speed. Slow and steady would get them home. Fast and careless would get them killed. When the eastern sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, she called a halt. They found another hiding spot, this time in a cluster of rocks beneath an overhanging cliff face. Chen distributed water, each person receiving a carefully measured amount. It was not enough to truly satisfy thirst, but it was what they could spare. Food came next. Protein bars that tasted like cardboard but provided necessary calories. Thompson complained quietly about the taste, and Williams teased him about being spoiled. The brief moment of normalcy helped, reminding them all that they were still human, still a team, still capable of finding light in darkness. Maria assigned watch rotations and ordered everyone else to sleep. She would take first watch again, unable to rest while her mind raced through scenarios and contingencies. What if the enemy had sent patrols along this route? What if their water ran out before they reached base? What if someone got injured and could not continue? She pushed the thoughts away, focusing instead on the immediate present. Right now they were alive and together. That had to be enough. The day passed slowly, heat building as the sun climbed higher. Their hiding spot provided shade but trapped warm air, making it feel like an oven by midday. Everyone struggled to sleep in the heat, tossing and turning on the hard ground. Maria watched the surrounding terrain through binoculars, scanning for any sign of pursuit. She saw nothing, but that did not mean they were safe. The enemy could be anywhere, watching and waiting. As afternoon faded toward evening, Jackson worked on the radio again. He had spent most of the day taking it apart and examining every component, looking for whatever had failed. Maria watched him work, admiring his dedication even though she knew the chances of repair were slim. The radio had taken serious damage, and without proper tools or replacement parts, fixing it would require a miracle. When darkness returned, they prepared to move again. Everyone checked their gear, tightened straps, and mentally prepared for another night of difficult travel. Maria could see exhaustion in their faces, the strain of constant alertness and physical exertion taking its toll, but she also saw determination, the refusal to give up that marked true soldiers. They would keep going because stopping was not an option. The second night proved even more challenging than the first. The terrain grew steeper, forcing them to climb in places where a fall would likely be fatal. Rodriguez led them along narrow paths that seemed to appear and disappear in the darkness. More than once they had to backtrack when a promising route ended in an impassable cliff or rockslide. Each detour cost them time and energy they could not afford to waste. Around midnight, Williams slipped. His foot came down on loose gravel and slid out from under him. He fell hard, sliding several feet down a slope before catching himself on a sturdy bush. Maria's heart nearly stopped as she watched him slide, certain he would keep falling into the darkness below. But he held on, and Thompson scrambled down to help him back up. They took a break after that, everyone shaken by how close they had come to losing someone. Williams had scraped his hands badly on the rocks, and Chen cleaned and bandaged them by the dim light of a red-filtered flashlight. He tried to joke about it, saying he had always been clumsy, but his voice shook slightly. Maria squeezed his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of his fear and his courage in continuing despite it. By dawn, they had covered another 8 kilometers, putting them roughly halfway to base if Rodriguez's calculations were correct. They found shelter in a cave this time, a shallow depression in the mountainside that provided better protection from the elements. Maria allowed herself to feel a small measure of hope. If they could maintain this pace, they might reach safety in another 2 nights, but hope proved dangerous. As the sun rose, they heard it, the distant thump of helicopter rotors growing steadily louder. Maria ordered everyone deeper into the cave, pressed against the back wall where shadows were darkest. They held their breath as the sound grew closer, the helicopter passing somewhere nearby. It was searching for them, sweeping the mountains in a grid pattern. The helicopter made several passes throughout the morning, never close enough to spot them but near enough to make escape impossible. They were trapped, unable to move without being seen. Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Water supplies dwindled further. Stomachs growled with hunger. But they remained still and silent, knowing their lives depended on patience. It was Thompson who first showed signs of serious distress. As the day wore on, he began to sweat heavily despite the cave's coolness. His skin took on a grayish pallor and his breathing became shallow and rapid. Chen examined him quickly, her face growing concerned. Dehydration and altitude sickness, a dangerous combination. He needed water and rest, preferably at a lower elevation. They could provide neither. Maria watched as Chen worked to stabilize Thompson, using their limited medical supplies to treat his symptoms. The young soldier tried to insist he was fine, that he could continue, but his body told a different story. Maria made a difficult calculation. If Thompson's condition worsened, he would become unable to travel at all. If that happened, they would face an impossible choice between leaving him behind or staying with him and risking the entire team. She pulled Rodriguez and Jackson aside, speaking in whispers too low for Thompson to hear. They needed a new plan, something that accounted for their deteriorating situation. Rodriguez suggested splitting up, with some team members moving ahead to reach base and send help while others stayed with Thompson. Jackson argued against it, pointing out that smaller groups would be more vulnerable to enemy patrols. Maria listened to both arguments, weighing options that all seemed equally bad. The decision was taken out of her hands when the helicopter returned in the afternoon, this time flying a search pattern that brought it directly over their position. They pressed themselves flat against the cave floor as the aircraft thundered overhead, so close that Maria could feel the vibration in her bones. It passed without stopping, but the message was clear. The enemy was tightening the search grid, and it was only a matter of time before they were discovered. As soon as the helicopter moved on, Maria made her decision. They would wait until dark, then make a forced march regardless of Thompson's condition. They would take turns supporting him if necessary, but they had to move. Staying in one place had become more dangerous than traveling. Her team nodded agreement, understanding the necessity even if they did not like it. Chen gave Thompson stimulants from the medical kit, carefully measured doses that would help him stay alert and mobile. It was a temporary solution, borrowing energy from reserves he did not have, but it was all they could do. He swallowed the pills and tried to smile, telling everyone he would be fine. Maria wished she could believe him. Darkness fell, and they emerged from the cave into a night that felt colder than before. Or perhaps they were all just more tired, more worn down by stress and deprivation. Thompson stood with difficulty, supported by Williams on one side and Chen on the other. He tried to walk on his own but stumbled after just a few steps. This was going to be a long night. They moved slowly, accommodating Thompson's limitations. Rodriguez continued to navigate, but Maria could see the concern on his face. At this pace, it would take them at least 3 more nights to reach base, possibly 4. They did not have enough water for that. They did not have enough anything for that. 2 hours into the march, Thompson collapsed. One moment he was walking, the next he was on the ground, unconscious. Chen immediately began checking his vital signs while Maria and the others formed a defensive perimeter. His pulse was rapid and weak, his breathing shallow. Chen looked up at Maria and shook her head slightly. Thompson was deteriorating fast, and without proper medical care, he might not survive the night. Maria felt the weight of command crushing down on her. This young man, barely out of training, was dying because of decisions she had made. If she had chosen a different observation point, if she had been more careful, if she had done 1,000 things differently, he might be safe at base right now. But regret was a luxury she could not afford. She had to focus on the living, on getting as many of her people home as possible. She made the hardest decision of her life. They would make Thompson as comfortable as possible, leave him with supplies and weapons, and continue to base. Once there, they would send a rescue team back for him. It was abandonment, and it went against every instinct she had, but it was also the only way to save the rest of her team. If they stayed, they all died. If they went, Thompson had at least a chance. The team stared at her in disbelief when she announced the decision. Williams was the first to protest, his voice rising in anger. They did not leave people behind. That was the rule, the code they all lived by. Jackson agreed, arguing that they could find a way to carry Thompson if they worked together. Even Rodriguez, usually calm and logical, looked troubled by the idea of abandoning their teammate. Maria let them voice their objections, understanding their anger because she felt it too. But when they finished, she explained the mathematics of their situation with brutal clarity. They had water for perhaps one more day if they rationed carefully. Food for 2 days at most. Thompson could not walk, which meant carrying him. Carrying him meant slower progress, which meant more days in the mountains. More days meant death for everyone. Leaving him gave the rest of them a chance to reach help and send it back. Chen spoke up then, her voice quiet but firm. She would stay with Thompson. Someone needed to provide medical care, and she was best qualified. If the rest of the team could reach base and send help within 2 days, there was a real chance both she and Thompson could survive. It was not abandonment if someone chose to stay. It was triage, making hard choices to maximize survival. Maria wanted to refuse, to order Chen to come with them. But she knew Chen was right. Thompson's chances improved significantly with medical care, and Chen was trained for exactly this kind of situation. Still, the thought of leaving 2 people behind rather than one made her stomach twist with guilt and fear. These were her people, her responsibility, and she was failing them. They spent an hour preparing a shelter for Thompson and Chen, using rocks and their emergency blankets to create a windbreak. They left them with most of the remaining medical supplies, extra ammunition, and more than their fair share of water. Chen would ration it carefully, making it last as long as possible. If rescue did not come within 3 days, she had instructions to try hiking out with Thompson if he recovered enough, or to go alone if he did not. The goodbyes were brief because anything more would have broken them all. Thompson was barely conscious, aware enough to understand what was happening but too weak to protest. Chen gripped Maria's hand for a long moment, her eyes conveying everything words could not: trust, fear, determination. Maria promised they would return with help, a promise she swore to keep or die trying. Then they were moving again, now a team of 4 instead of 6. The weight of those 2 missing people seemed heavier than any physical burden. Maria could feel their absence like a wound, raw and bleeding. She forced herself to focus on the path ahead, on the remaining members of her team who needed her leadership. Grief and guilt would have to wait. They pushed harder now, driven by desperation and the knowledge that 2 lives depended on their speed. Rodriguez found faster routes, accepting greater risks in exchange for covering more distance. They climbed cliffs that should have required ropes and gear, trusting to luck and skill. They crossed unstable slopes where rock slides could start with any misstep. Every choice was a gamble, but staying slow and safe was a guaranteed loss. Dawn found them exhausted and still hours from base. Maria called a brief halt, allowing everyone to catch their breath and drink the last of their water. 4 empty bottles represented their complete lack of reserves. From this point forward, they were running on pure determination. Rodriguez checked his map and compass, calculating their position. If his estimates were correct, they were approximately 6 kilometers from safety. 6 kilometers that might as well have been 100 given their condition. Williams suggested they rest through the day and complete the journey that night, but Maria vetoed the idea. Every hour they delayed was an hour closer to Thompson and Chen running out of supplies. They would continue in daylight, hoping that they were far enough from the valley to avoid enemy patrols. It was risky, but everything was risky now. At least this way they moved forward. The sun climbed higher as they stumbled through increasingly familiar terrain. Maria recognized landmarks from previous patrols, signs that they were indeed approaching their base. The knowledge gave her strength, a second wind when her body insisted it had nothing left to give. Around her, she could see similar determination in her remaining team members. They were going to make it. They had to make it. It was Jackson who spotted the patrol. He grabbed Maria's arm and pointed to a ridge about 200 meters away. Figures moving in formation, too distant to identify but definitely human. Maria's heart sank. After everything they had been through, to be caught this close to safety seemed impossibly cruel. She signaled for everyone to take cover behind rocks and scrub brush, trying to make themselves invisible. The figures came closer, following a path that would bring them within 50 meters of the team's position. Maria could see weapons now. Combat gear, the kind of equipment that marked soldiers rather than civilians. Enemy or friendly? At this distance, in their exhaustion, she could not tell. She readied her rifle, preparing to fight if necessary, even though she knew they had no chance against a full patrol in their current condition. Then Williams let out a choked laugh. He recognized one of the figures, a distinctive walk that belonged to Sergeant Martinez from their own unit. These were friendlies, a patrol from their base. They were saved. Maria wanted to cry and laugh and scream all at once. Instead, she stood up and called out, her voice cracking with exhaustion and emotion. The patrol reacted instantly, weapons coming up before recognition set in. Then there were shouts and people running toward them. Hands helped Maria stand when her legs tried to give out. Someone pressed a water bottle into her hands and she drank greedily, not caring that she was supposed to sip slowly. Questions came from all sides, everyone wanting to know what had happened, where the rest of the team was, whether they were injured. Maria pushed through the chaos and found the patrol leader, a lieutenant she had worked with before. She grabbed his arm and spoke rapidly, words tumbling over each other in her haste. Thompson and Chen were still out there. Coordinates burned into her memory. They needed immediate evacuation, medical support, helicopter if possible. The lieutenant was already talking into his radio before she finished, calling for emergency response. Within minutes, a plan was forming. A medevac helicopter was being prepped at base. A larger rescue team was assembling. Maria and her remaining team members would be escorted back to base for medical evaluation and debriefing. Everything was happening so fast after days of slow, grinding survival. Maria felt dizzy with relief and residual fear, unable to fully process that they were actually safe. The journey back to base passed in a blur. Maria walked between two members of the patrol, their hands ready to catch her if she fell. Her body was shutting down now that safety was within reach, adrenaline finally depleting after days of constant flow. Her vision swam and sound seemed to come from very far away. She fought to stay conscious, needing to see this through to the end. Base appeared ahead, a cluster of buildings and defensive positions that had never looked more beautiful. Medical personnel rushed forward with stretchers, but Maria waved them off. She could walk. She would walk. Rodriguez and Williams and Jackson did the same, all of them determined to enter base on their own feet. It was pride, perhaps foolish given their condition, but it mattered to them. The base commander met them at the entrance, his face showing relief and concern in equal measure. He started to speak, probably to welcome them back or ask questions, but Maria cut him off. She needed confirmation that the rescue operation was underway, needed to know that Thompson and Chen would be recovered. The commander assured her that the helicopter had already launched, carrying a full medical team and enough personnel to secure the area. Only then did Maria allow herself to be led to the medical facility. A doctor examined her quickly, checking vital signs and looking for serious injuries. She was dehydrated, exhausted, and had numerous cuts and bruises, but nothing life-threatening. An IV was started to address the dehydration, and she was given food that her stomach almost rejected after days of minimal rations. The doctor wanted her to rest, but Maria refused. She would not sleep until she knew Thompson and Chen were safe. Rodriguez, Williams, and Jackson were in similar condition, all of them being treated for dehydration and minor injuries. They gathered in the medical facility's waiting area, too wired to rest despite their exhaustion. Conversation was sparse, everyone lost in their own thoughts about what they had been through and what might still be happening in those mountains. Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Maria watched the clock, calculating distances and flight times. trying to estimate when the rescue team should reach Thompson and Chen's position. Every minute felt like an eternity. She replayed her decisions over and over, questioning whether she had made the right calls. Should they have stayed together? Should they have tried a different route? Should she have insisted on better intelligence before the mission even started? Williams seemed to read her thoughts. He moved to sit beside her and spoke quietly, telling her that she had done everything right. She had kept them alive when they should have died. She had made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. That was what leaders did, and she was a good leader. Maria wanted to believe him, but guilt was a stubborn companion. The base commander appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. Maria's heart nearly stopped. Neutral could mean anything, good or bad. She stood on shaky legs, facing him with dread pooling in her stomach. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking, and in that pause Maria lived 1,000 outcomes, each one worse than the last. The rescue team had reached the coordinates she provided. They found Thompson and Chen alive. Thompson was in serious condition but stable, already being loaded onto the helicopter for transport. Chen was exhausted but unharmed, having kept Thompson alive through skill and determination. They would both be back at base within the hour, receiving full medical care. The mission, for all its disasters, had not cost any lives. Maria felt her legs give out. Someone caught her before she hit the floor, probably Williams or Jackson. Relief flooded through her so intensely it was almost painful. She had not failed them. Her team was alive, all 6 members accounted for. Tears came then, impossible to hold back, and she did not try. She cried for the fear and the exhaustion and the terrible weight of command that she had carried alone through those mountains. Her team surrounded her, everyone crying or trying not to, all of them understanding what this moment meant. They had survived something that should have killed them. They had faced impossible odds and come through together. The bond between them now went deeper than training or protocol. They had looked into the abyss and pulled each other back from the edge. The helicopter landed an hour later, exactly as promised. Medical teams rushed out to receive Thompson, who was carried in on a stretcher, oxygen mask covering his face. He looked terrible, pale and thin and barely conscious, but he was breathing and his eyes opened when Maria took his hand. She told him he was safe, that he had done well, that she was proud of him. He tried to smile around the oxygen mask before being whisked away to the intensive care unit. Chen walked off the helicopter under her own power, though she accepted support from a medic. She looked like she had aged years in just a few days, her face gaunt and marked with exhaustion, but her eyes were clear and focused. The eyes of someone who had done her job and done it well. She found Maria immediately and they embraced without words. Sometimes there was nothing that needed to be said. The debriefing came next, though the commander mercifully delayed it until everyone had slept and eaten properly. Maria and her team were given quarters with orders to rest for at least 12 hours. She fell into a bed that felt impossibly soft after nights on rocky ground, and sleep claimed her instantly. She slept without dreams, her mind and body finally shutting down completely after days of unrelenting stress. When she woke, it was evening again. For a moment she felt disoriented, unsure where she was or how much time had passed. Then memory returned, and with it the knowledge that they were safe. She lay in bed for a few minutes, just breathing and feeling the comfort of being clean and warm and secure. It seemed almost unreal after everything they had been through. The debriefing took place in the commander's office, all 6 team members present along with several intelligence officers. Maria recounted everything that had happened, from the initial observation to the ambush to their desperate flight through the mountains. Rodriguez provided navigational details, marking their route on maps. Jackson explained the radio failure. Chen described keeping Thompson alive with limited supplies. Williams and Thompson, who had been released from intensive care though still weak, added their perspectives. The intelligence officers asked detailed questions about the enemy forces they had observed, the vehicles and weapons and personnel. Maria answered as best she could, though much of that initial observation felt like it had happened years ago rather than just days. She provided the camera with its documentation, hoping the photos had survived their rough journey. The officers seemed pleased with the information, calling it valuable intelligence despite the cost of obtaining it. After the formal debriefing ended, the commander asked Maria to stay behind. Her team filed out, leaving her alone with him in the quiet office. She braced herself for criticism, for questions about her decisions, for all the ways she might have failed in his eyes. Instead, he asked her how she was really doing, not as a soldier but as a person. The unexpected kindness nearly undone her composure. She told him the truth. She was struggling with the choices she had made, with leaving Thompson and Chen behind even though it had been the right decision. She was questioning everything about the mission, wondering if she could have prevented the ambush or found a better escape route. She was haunted by all the ways things could have gone worse, all the moments where luck rather than skill had saved them. The weight of command felt heavier now than it had in the mountains, because now she had time to think about it. The commander listened without interrupting, letting her speak until she had nothing left to say. Then he told her about his own first command mission, decades ago, when he had lost 2 soldiers to an IED. He described the guilt that had eaten at him for years, the endless second-guessing, the nightmares that still came occasionally. He told her that leadership meant carrying weight that never fully went away, but it also meant learning to forgive yourself for being human. He said something that stuck with her. Command was not about making perfect decisions. It was about making the best decision possible with the information available, then living with the consequences. She had done that. Her team was alive because of choices she made under impossible pressure. That was success, even if it did not feel like it yet. The guilt would fade with time, though it might never disappear completely. That was the price of leadership, and she was strong enough to pay it. Maria left his office feeling marginally better, though still troubled. She found her team in the mess hall, eating real food for the first time in days. Thompson was there too, still pale but sitting up and managing to eat on his own. She joined them and they talked about nothing important, just normal conversation that felt precious after their ordeal. They were finding their way back to being people instead of just survivors. Over the following days, a routine established itself. Medical checks every morning, physical therapy for injuries and depleted strength, psychological evaluations to ensure everyone was processing the trauma appropriately. Maria went through it all mechanically, doing what was required but feeling disconnected from the process. Part of her was still in those mountains, still making impossible choices, still carrying the weight of lives in her hands. She spent time with each team member individually, checking on them and letting them talk if they needed to. Rodriguez seemed to be handling things well, already studying maps and planning future missions. Williams was quieter than usual but functional, working through his experience in his own way. Jackson had thrown himself into repairing and maintaining equipment, finding comfort in the concrete and fixable. Thompson was physically recovering but struggling emotionally with how close he had come to dying. Chen was the most affected, withdrawn and jumpy, startling at sudden noises. Maria sat with Chen one evening, just the two of them watching the sun set over the mountains that had nearly killed them. Chen finally opened up, talking about the 2 days she had spent alone with Thompson, not knowing if help would come, watching him deteriorate and feeling helpless despite all her training. She had accepted that they would probably die there, had made peace with it. Coming back felt strange, like she did not quite belong in the world anymore. Maria understood that feeling perfectly. She told Chen about her own struggle to reconnect, to feel normal again after being pushed to the absolute limit. They talked for hours, helping each other process what they had been through. By the time they parted, both felt lighter, the burden of experience shared rather than carried alone. Sometimes the best therapy was simply knowing someone else understood. 3 weeks after their return, the team was cleared for duty. Thompson needed more time to fully recover, but the rest of them were deemed physically and mentally fit to return to normal operations. There was talk of medals and commendations, formal recognition of their survival and the intelligence they had gathered. Maria did not care about any of that. She just wanted to move forward, to prove to herself that she could still do her job effectively. Their first mission back was deliberately simple. A routine patrol of secure territory, more about rebuilding confidence than accomplishing any critical objective. Maria led her team through familiar terrain, and slowly they found their rhythm again. The trust between them had grown stronger rather than weaker, forged in shared adversity. They moved like parts of a single organism, each person anticipating the other's actions. But the mountains had changed for Maria. Every ridge looked like a potential ambush site. Every valley seemed like a trap. She caught herself being overly cautious, second-guessing decisions that should have been automatic. Her team noticed but did not comment, giving her space to work through it. Rodriguez quietly took over some navigation duties. Williams watched their flanks more carefully. Jackson stayed closer to her, a silent support. They were taking care of her the way she had taken care of them. Slowly, over multiple missions, Maria began to trust herself again. The hypervigilance faded to normal caution. The second-guessing became simple evaluation. The weight of command remained, but she learned to carry it more comfortably. She would never forget those days in the mountains, never stop seeing Thompson's gray face or Chen's exhausted eyes. But the memories lost their power to paralyze her. 6 months after the incident, Maria was promoted to first-class petty officer. The promotion came with increased responsibility and the expectation of greater leadership. She accepted it with mixed feelings, proud of the recognition but wary of what it meant. More people depending on her decisions, more weight to carry, more chances to fail, but she also knew she was ready. The mountains had tested her and she had survived. Whatever came next, she could handle it. Her team celebrated the promotion together, a quiet gathering in the mess hall with food and stories and laughter. They had become more than colleagues or even friends. They were family, bound by shared experience that few others could understand. Thompson, now fully recovered and back on active duty, gave a speech about how Maria had saved his life. Chen added that she had saved all their lives, making decisions that no one should have to make. Maria felt embarrassed by the praise but also grateful for it, needing to hear that her team did not blame her for what had happened. The intelligence gathered during their mission proved more valuable than anyone initially realized. The photographs Maria had taken, somehow surviving their journey undamaged, revealed details about enemy supply operations that led to successful interdiction missions. The route information they provided helped other teams avoid similar ambushes. Lives were saved because of what they had endured. It did not make the experience easier to bear, but it gave it meaning beyond simple survival. Maria began mentoring younger soldiers, sharing lessons learned in those mountains without dwelling on the trauma. She taught them about decision-making under pressure, about the importance of teamwork, about how to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. Some of her students probably thought she was being dramatic, exaggerating the difficulties they might face. Others recognized the truth in her words, the hard-earned wisdom that only came from real experience. She hoped they would never need to use those lessons, but she made sure they had them just in case. A year after the incident, the entire team received commendations for their actions. The ceremony was formal and full of speeches about courage and dedication. Maria stood at attention while medals were pinned to uniforms, feeling oddly disconnected from the whole thing. The medals were just metal and ribbon. The real recognition was standing beside her teammates, all of them alive and whole. That was the only award that mattered. After the ceremony, her mother called. She had seen news about the commendations and wanted to know what had happened, what her daughter had been through. Maria tried to explain in terms her mother would understand, editing out the worst details to spare her worry. But her mother was not fooled. She could hear the changes in Maria's voice, the things left unsaid. She told Maria she was proud of her, but also that she prayed every day for her to come home safe. Maria promised to be careful, knowing it was a promise she might not be able to keep. Her father sent a letter, something he rarely did. He wrote about courage and duty, about the traditions of service that ran deep in their community even though most people there had never served. He told her that leading people was the hardest job in the world because you carried not just your own weight but everyone else's too. He was proud she had proven herself capable of that burden. Maria cried reading the letter, grateful for his understanding and support. Thompson got married that year to a woman he had been dating before deployment. He asked Maria to attend the wedding, and she went despite feeling out of place among his civilian friends and family. During the reception, he pulled her aside and thanked her again for saving his life. He said he owed her everything, the chance to marry and have children and grow old. Maria told him he owed her nothing, that she had just done her job. But privately she was glad, so glad that her decisions had given him this future. Chen eventually transferred to a different unit, needing a fresh start away from reminders of those difficult days. They stayed in touch through emails and occasional calls, checking on each other and sharing news. Chen was doing well, her skills as a medic earning respect and recognition. She admitted that she still had nightmares sometimes, dreams about being trapped in the mountains with no help coming. Maria confessed she had the same dreams. They helped each other through the bad nights, voices on the phone reminding each other that they had survived and were safe. Rodriguez made a career of the military, steadily advancing through the ranks. Williams left after his enlistment ended, going home to start a business with his family. Jackson stayed in, continuing to work with communication systems and occasionally crossing paths with Maria on various assignments. They remained close, all of them, staying connected across distance and time. The experience that had nearly destroyed them became the foundation of bonds that would last the rest of their lives. Maria received offers to transfer to training commands, to use her experience to teach others. She considered it carefully, knowing she could make a real difference in how soldiers were prepared for the field. But something held her back. She was not ready to leave active service, to step back from the work that defined her. There were still missions to complete, still people who needed leadership, still mountains to climb both literally and figuratively. 2 years after the incident, she led another patrol into the same region where everything had gone wrong. Her current team did not know the history, did not understand why she moved so carefully through that particular valley. She conducted the mission flawlessly, gathering intelligence and returning everyone safely. For her, it was a kind of closure, proof that the mountains had not beaten her. She could still do her job, still make good decisions, still bring everyone home. She stood on the ridge where they had first been spotted, looking down into the valley below. The abandoned structures still stood, unchanged by time or conflict. The road still wound through the center, empty in the morning light. Nothing about the place suggested the terror and desperation it had witnessed. It was just a valley, indifferent to human struggle, as beautiful and harsh as ever. Maria thought about the person she had been before this place, and the person she had become after. Command had changed her, marked her in ways that would never fully fade. She carried scars that no one could see, weight that never completely lifted, but she also carried strength she had not known she possessed. Resilience tested beyond anything she could have imagined. The mountains had tried to break her, and she had walked out carrying not just herself but the path to survival for everyone depending on her. She turned away from the valley and signaled her team to move out. There was work to do, missions to complete, people counting on her leadership. The past would always be part of her, but it did not define her future. She was Maria Santos, Petty Officer First Class, leader of soldiers, survivor of impossible odds. She had walked through the valley of death and emerged on the other side. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same determination that had carried her through those terrible days. Her team followed her down the mountain, trusting her to lead them safely. She accepted that trust as the precious gift it was, vowing to never take it for granted. Every day was an opportunity to prove worthy of the responsibility placed in her hands. Every mission was a chance to bring everyone home. That was her purpose, her calling, the reason she wore the uniform and carried the weight. The sun climbed higher as they descended, warming the rocks and chasing away the morning chill. Maria felt strong and centered, more herself than she had been in years. The mountains had taken much from her, but they had also given her something invaluable. They had shown her exactly what she was capable of when everything was stripped away except the will to survive and the determination to save others. She had found her limits and discovered they were further than she ever imagined. Behind her, one of her team members asked a question about the terrain. Maria answered clearly and confidently, her voice carrying no trace of doubt or hesitation. She was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The path ahead was uncertain, full of challenges and dangers she could not predict. But she would walk it anyway, carrying whatever burden was required, leading whoever followed, finding the way forward even when the path seemed impossible. That was who she was. That was who she would always be.